Hi, my name's Roger Osborne. In this video, we're looking at tides and specifically how tides impact beach fishing. High tide, low tide and everything in between, and which is best. I've also created an in-depth training series on how to catch beachworms on my website beachworming.com.au. As you may know, beachworms are not easy to catch unless you have the right information and a good teacher. So many people have had incredible results simply by following my instructions. Given the fact that to buy a single beachworm frozen is around $5, this knowledge is gold to fishers everywhere. Learning about tides is certainly beneficial when it comes to all types of fishing and beach fishing. However, it's important to know that there aren't actually any rules, only guidelines. And when it comes to fishing off the beach, things like time of day and beach structure are probably more important than tides. I'm not wanting to get too technical, but it is very helpful to understand how the water flow changes during a tide cycle. The tide flow runs for 6 hours and is divided into 12 parts. This is known as the rule of twelfths. In the first hour of a tide, the water flow is 1/12 of the tide. The second hour, 2/12, the third hour, 3/12, the fourth hour, 3/12, the fifth, 2/12, and the sixth, 1/12. So we can see that the greatest movement of water is in the third and fourth hours of a tide. This time is called the flood tide. Here is an important fact. Fish are feeding on the beach all the time and can be caught on any tide. The tide influences fish movement and where the fish may be located. Low tide is a great time to fish and also a very good time to plan where you will fish at high tide. Regardless of which tide you fish, we want to know the shallow parts and the deep parts on a beach. If you're planning to fish at high tide, it's a really good idea to go to the beach at low tide so that you can see where the holes and gutters are, where the sandbars are, so that you know the structures when you come back later. But what you need to do is make a reference point on the beach or a landmark so that when you come back to fish later that day or even at night, you know exactly where you are fishing. Many fishermen love low tide, and here are the advantages of low tide fishing. At low tide, beach structure is much more easily defined. Deep areas and shallow areas are obvious. Fish are concentrated in the deeper areas. At low tide, you have access to cast to areas that you could not reach at high tide. I like to walk out onto sandbars and cast to the area just behind the breaking waves, or cast to the back of a gutter or trough. I have had many discussions with anglers about which tides they think are best, and this is some important information that I've found. A real highlight is the first 2 hours of a run-in tide, especially when you're fishing for whiting. As shallow areas begin to hold enough water depth, fish begin to move into these areas to feed. Now let's have a look at high tide and what are the benefits of fishing at high tide. At high tide, the deep water is close to shore and is easier to reach. A long cast is not required. The fish are often almost right at your feet, literally only a few meters from the shore. At high tide, it is difficult to see the structure and features of a beach. So remember, this is important, especially when you've taken the time to check out a spot and make a reference of where the deep holes are and the shallow areas are. If you're living in a busy city area, it's really good to have a backup fishing spot when you go and check out your spots at low tide, because you may come back later that afternoon or evening and find that someone else has had the same idea and is already in that spot. So I always have a plan B, you know, just to save disappointment. When it comes to mulloway fishing, it's generally held that around the high tide is the best time to fish, and specifically, or especially around evening and just before dark or after dark. However, many fishermen that I've spoken to have caught mulloway during the day, at low tide, and in fact at every stage of the tide. So that's not necessarily a defining factor, although it does appear to be a good time to fish for mulloway. It's not the be-all and end-all. Thank you for watching this video. I hope the information has been beneficial. Make sure you give it a thumbs up and please subscribe. It certainly helps my channel when you subscribe and you're the first person to receive new videos when they're published. Don't forget, if you're struggling to catch beachworms and would like to learn, check out my beachworming masterclass on my website beachworming.com.au. I spent months creating the best possible training to teach you how to catch beachworms, so make sure you check it out. If you've got any questions, please let me know in the comments and make sure to tell me if you catch any whoppers.